Before the message, will you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. There's an important link between the light and the law in the scriptures that were read this morning, even though it may not be immediately obvious. A clue can be found in verse 16. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Letting your light shine isn't about personal glory. It's about shining a spotlight on God, kind of like that one. As good as it may feel when people tell us that we're nice or smart or brave or what other compliment we may get, and there's nothing wrong with accepting that we do in fact have good qualities, okay? Don't be hard on yourself. Take those in. But that isn't what Jesus is talking about here. Now, I've been blessed with a good seminary education, although I was hardly a great scholar. But I have the privilege of worshiping with the Reverend Dr. Jose Morales, who is, in fact, a great scholar. And he's been teaching a study on the Gospel of Matthew at Downing Memorial Christian Church. He explained to us that the writer of this gospel believed that all of us who follow Jesus have to follow Jewish law as Jesus interpreted it. And that's an important distinction. In verse 20, Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, when Jesus talked about the Pharisees, he wasn't talking about all of the Pharisees. He was talking about the ones who were saying all the right things, but were collaborating with Rome. Dr. Morales again. The Pharisees were a sect of Judaism with teachings that were actually very much like the things that Jesus taught. So calling all of the Pharisees hypocrites would be like calling all German Christians Nazis because some of them supported Hitler. It wasn't all of the Pharisees that he was referring to, and his audience at the time would have known that. If salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. So let's not get bogged down in questions of about how salt can lose its saltiness. That's science, and I don't want to get into all that. But salt has a purpose, and that is the point that Jesus was trying to get across. The purpose of salt is to season food or to be used as a preservative. If it's no longer fulfilling its purpose, it's useless. And so what Jesus is trying to remind us about is that we too have a purpose. And our purpose is to be the light of the world, to draw people's attention to the goodness of God. And if we read on a little farther in the 5th chapter of Matthew, I hope I'm not stepping on next week's message. If you read on a little farther in the 5th chapter of Matthew, you'll get a glimpse into how Jesus viewed the law. This is one of my favorites, just one example. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. Now, I'm smiling not because I think that's funny. I'm smiling because I know that it isn't easy. And I could name a few people, but I won't. I could name a few people that I have trouble with, but I won't. So I have to push myself. I make myself pray for them, and I ask myself, what can I do differently? Because love is a verb, an action. It's not a noun, a thing, a feeling. Love is an action. And if those people that are a challenge to me aren't given the same respect, the same effort, the same love that I would give to any one of you or to my family or to my friends, I'm missing the mark. Later in Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now, I said earlier that you don't have to dismiss it when someone compliments you. Take that in, because how can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't, in fact, love yourself, right? So I want you to think of this side by side with the story of the disciples picking and eating grain on the Sabbath. And it's clear that Jesus was not legalistic. He didn't keep a checklist of statutes and transgressions. Instead, he cared about compassion and kindness. Now we're going to get to the meat of my personal theology. If you read the first three Gospels, those that are called the Synoptic Gospels because they share a common source, I think you'll discover that Jesus was less concerned with what we believe than what we do. He didn't refuse to heal the Roman centurion's servant because he didn't like his politics or because he was a foreigner. He didn't question the multitudes about their theology before he fed them. And when the Canaanite woman came asking him to heal her daughter and pointed out that even the puppies get to eat the crumbs from the floor, he didn't say, "Good answer, but which God do you worship?" When Jesus says, "Whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven," he isn't saying that we need to memorize all 613 commandments. He's saying we need to look at the intent behind the law, and the intent is love. And you may have heard some version of this story. A driver slowed to let another car merge, and because of that, he barely made it through the intersection before the light turned red. The woman behind him, who had to stop, went ballistic. She was pounding on her horn and cussing and saluting with her middle finger. And in the middle of her temper tantrum, she heard a tap on her window. And she looked up into the face of a police officer. So the officer ordered her out of the car with her hands up. He handcuffed her and put her in the back seat of his patrol car. Terrified, the woman sat there while the officer stood outside the car talking on his radio. But eventually he opened the door and he removed the cuff, saying, "I apologize for the mistake. I pulled up behind your car while you were blowing your horn and flipping off the guy in front of you and cussing at him, and I noticed the 'What would Jesus do' bumper sticker, the 'Follow me to Sunday school' bumper sticker, and the Christian fish emblem on the trunk, so naturally I assumed you had stolen the car." Oops. Well, okay, that reminds me of a story I heard recently at work, and I told the woman there's a sermon illustration in there, and I promised I wouldn't use her name. So this woman worked in another department for the city of Los Angeles, and she had worked late, and when she tried to leave, there was so much traffic, she couldn't merge in to get out of the parking lot, and she was getting really frustrated. So finally, she just went for it. And then she put her hand out the window, and you can guess what she did with that hand, right? The little one-finger salute. And the other car changed lanes, and when they pulled up to the stoplight, she looked to her left, and it was her director that she had. So that's a good reminder for all of us that anytime you look in someone's face, you're seeing the face of God, right? We're all created in the image of God. So I digress. But sometimes we need to remember it's the small courtesies that make a difference. Smiling at a stranger, or holding the door for someone else to pass through, or letting a car merge in front of us. And it isn't only Christians who do these things, let's be honest. Followers of other religious traditions or no religion at all, even atheists, can be thoughtful and courteous, generous, caring people. So surely it isn't too much to ask that we do the same. A few weeks ago, I was at the grocery store picking up a loaf of bread for communion, when a woman looked at me and asked, "What planet are you from?" And I have to tell you, at first I thought she was mentally ill. And she said, "You're smiling. Nobody does that anymore." So I laughed and I invited her to church. Then I'm not telling you to put on a fake smile. Please don't do that. God knows, and people can usually tell the difference. You don't have to hide your feelings. But I'm only saying that you might be surprised how little it can take for your light to shine. But those are the little things. Those are the easy things. Some of the harder things, and I may be accused of getting political, but it's all over the news, the debates, the this, the that, the upcoming election, the primaries, whatever. And when we vote, whether we're voting for a local measure or for someone to fill an elected position, whether it's in our city council or the Board of Education or the president, whatever it is, we need to remember that if we vote only for those issues and those people that are going to be the best for us, we're not shining a light on the goodness of God. We have to look at the bigger picture to remember the multitudes who may or may not believe like we do, the people who may be of a different political party than we are, or from a country that maybe we don't really trust, for the people who are just like us, somebody's children, maybe somebody's parents, someone's brother or sister, but all created in the image of God and all important to Jesus. Because our job isn't to get, if I say it that way, it's more confusing. Let me try it this way. My job as a Christian isn't to get me into heaven. Your job as a Christian isn't to get you into heaven, or you, any of you. That's not our job. It's not about me. It's about building the kingdom of heaven here. That's what Jesus talked about. The kingdom of heaven isn't something far away in time and location. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus said that. So be the light that shines like a city on a hill. Amen.